Before the snow fell on those mountains, before the first fire was lit in the first great hall, before any man or mer had ever lifted their eyes to the sky and called what they saw a god, he was already there. Black wings, a silhouette against something older than color. He had a name that was also a sentence. 3 words in a language that predates every written tongue on Tamriel. A language in which naming something is not description but command, not a label placed on a thing, but the declaration of what a thing fundamentally is. Those 3 words were not given to him. They were simply what he was. Alduin, destroyer, devour, master. Hold those 3 words. The first 2 are what you expect from a villain. The third is the strange one. We will come back to it. Take a slow breath. Let your shoulders drop. There is no hurry. We have the whole night. There is something sitting at the center of this story I want to hold until we have earned it. When it arrives, it changes what everything before it meant, not in a small way, but in the way that makes you look back at his wings against the sky and feel something you did not expect to feel. What the lore asks quietly, underneath all the shouts and the fire and the grinding weight of ancient stone, is this: what happens to a being whose entire purpose is destruction, when that being decides it would rather stay? The answer is the whole story. The dragon tongue is not a language the way human languages are languages. When a dragon speaks a word, it does not describe a thing. It commands the thing to be. The word walls scattered across the landscape of Skyrim, the great carved stones the last dragonborn finds and learns from, preserve fragments of this power in stone because stone is the only material that lasts long enough to be worth carving. In this language, names are truths, not labels. Truths. Alduin's name, broken into its 3 root words, means destroyer, devour, and master. Not ruler, not king, not even conqueror. Destroyer is a role, devour is a function. And master, here is the 3rd word, the strange one. Master describes a relationship between the action and everything the action is performed upon. He is not the master of a throne. He is the master of the act of consuming, the one who completes the devouring, the one who presides over the end. This is what a function looks like, named in a language that does not permit exaggeration. And the lore tells us something about him that most people walk past without stopping. In the texts that describe him in the age before the dragon cult existed, before the temples rose and the dragon priests learned cruelty from the sky, Alduin is described as the wisest and most far-seeing of all dragons. Not the strongest, the wisest. Think about what it means to be the wisest thing alive and still make the choice he made. That is not a story about a monster. That is a story about something that knew exactly what it was giving up. Something about what he later became has to be understood against that detail. Not a force that was always violent, always hungry for dominion. A vast intelligence that saw further than anything else alive, and chose, at some point, to stop looking forward and start looking down. There is something worth knowing about how other cultures across Tamriel remember him. Not just the Nords of Skyrim, though they are the ones who named him and feared him most directly. The ancient Khajiit called their version of him Al-Khan, the Scaled Prince, the firstborn of Akka, who grew larger with every soul he consumed. The Skal people of Solstheim knew a being called Thartag, the World Devourer, who arrives at the end of seasons. The Yokudans, who became the Redguard, had Satakal, a serpentine figure who swallows the world and recreates it in an endless cycle. Every culture that has looked long enough at the deep structure of the world eventually arrives at the same enormous shape, waiting at the end of every age. Not a villain, a mechanism. That detail will mean more before we are done. The Atmorans. The ancient people of the frozen northern continent of Atmora, precursors to the Nords, brought their religion south with them when they migrated to Tamriel. That religion was built around animal totems, the hawk, the wolf, the bear, and above all, the dragon. The dragon was the most important figure in their entire cosmological understanding. To the Atmorans, dragons were not simply powerful creatures. They were the divine made visible and present in the world. In Atmora, the arrangement that formed around this belief was almost peaceful. Dragons did not want to govern. The lore is consistent on this. The business of managing settlements, feeding communities, and maintaining order was handled by a special class of mortals, dragon priests, given real power by real dragons in exchange for total devotion. They ruled in the dragons' names. The dragons remained mostly remote, vast presences above the world, impassive and enormous, occasionally devastating, but not personally, deliberately cruel. There was a kind of equilibrium in the cold, an arrangement that worked, or at least did not break. Tamriel changed everything. When the dragon cult arrived on the continent, the dragon priests stopped managing and started ruling. The difference between those two things is not always visible at first. Management produces outcomes for the people being managed. Rule produces outcomes for the ruler. In a richer land, with more people to take from and far more reasons to take, the priests became something close to tyrants. The in-game lore is clear. The population was increasingly subjugated to the demands of the cult. Tributes, labor, the construction of grand temples at enormous human cost. Generations born under this arrangement knew nothing else. They grew up in the shadow of something they had been taught to call holy. The ruins of those temples are still standing in the Fourth Era. The doorways are too large, the ceilings too high, the stone too cold, and too smooth to have been built for anyone who needed warmth or softness. Walking through them, the listener should feel it. These spaces were not made for the human body. They were made for something that entered through doors wide enough for wings. The people who built them didn't choose to. Their children grew up knowing the dimensions of those doorways before they knew anything else. That is the specific inheritance of a subjugation that runs long enough. Not fear of the overseer, but an architecture of smallness so old it feels like nature. And every dragon priest who ruled from within those halls drew their authority from one source. Every cruelty they committed was committed in one name. The entire theological architecture of a continent's worth of suffering rested on one legitimizing presence: Alduin. He was not managing this. He was not interested in its daily operation. He was simply there, the vast, dark, authorizing force that made every terrible thing the priests did a matter of divine will rather than individual choice. When the dragon priests were cruel, they were cruel for him. When the people suffered, they suffered for him. He had built this system not to destroy the world, but to be adored by it, to remain at the center of everything, massive and permanent, while the world arranged itself around his continued presence. There was one dragon, however, who understood exactly what Alduin had become, who had stood close enough and long enough to see it clearly, who carried a name that was not a title but a confession of everything he had done in Alduin's service. Paarthurnax. Ambition. Overlord. Cruelty. That was the name of Alduin's brother, his lieutenant, the second most powerful dragon alive, who had committed terrible things in the World Eater's name and knew, with perfect clarity, what he was doing when he did them. He was not a reluctant enforcer. He chose it. And then he chose something else. He was carrying his own sins in his name, and he chose to carry them as a reminder rather than a wound. What he did next is the hinge on which everything turns. The Dragon War was not quick. Nordic rebels, facing an enemy that could fly, breathe fire and frost, and could not be permanently killed by any conventional wound, because dragons, as children of the divine, do not die the way mortal creatures die, should not have been able to win. Their bodies can be destroyed. Their souls persist, riding the current of time, waiting to return to flesh. Only a dragonborn, someone carrying a dragon's soul in a mortal body, can absorb that essence and prevent its return. The rebels did not have a dragonborn at the start. They had iron and desperation, and the particular ferocity that comes from having nothing left to lose after too many generations of losing. They fought and died and returned to fight again, and the dragons circled above, and the dragon priests directed their forces from the cold stone halls, and every calculation pointed the wrong way. And then Paarthurnax crossed lines. The lore holds two explanations for his betrayal without resolving them into one. Paarthurnax himself, when the last dragonborn finally reaches him at the summit of the throat of the world, says that it was Alduin's false claim of godhood that turned him, that watching his brother declare himself divine, watching the entire world reshape itself around a lie that Paarthurnax knew was a lie, was what broke his loyalty. The belief in what Alduin was supposed to be was stronger than loyalty to what Alduin had actually become. Nordic legend, meanwhile, says it was the goddess Kine who intervened, the wind goddess, the storm mother, who sent Paarthurnax to the rebels' side. Whether a goddess moved him or whether he moved himself and the goddess, simply watched, the outcome was the same. He descended from the sky toward the mortals, and he found 3 people willing to be taught. Germloth Golden Hilt, Hakon One Eye, Feldir the Old. The first tongues, the first mortals in the history of the world who could use the voice. Paarthurnax taught them the Thu'um. Not everything, not the full breadth of a language older than human civilization, but enough. Enough to fight. Enough to turn the language of gods back on a god who had forgotten his purpose. Several other dragons turned with him. The war's momentum shifted. But Alduin himself could not be killed. Not on any battlefield. Not by any combination of mortal weapons and newly learned shouts. His nature as the firstborn of Akatosh, his connection to the structure of time itself, made him something that the world was not yet equipped to end. So the 3 heroes climbed to the summit of the throat of the world, 7,000 steps above everything, where the air is thin and the stone is ancient, and the wind never quite stops. And they used a shout against him that Alduin had never heard before. Dragonrend was built from hatred. The lore confirms this explicitly. It was the first Thu'um ever created by mortals alone, assembled not from wonder or reverence or the elegant discipline of the voice, but from generations of accumulated suffering. It did not wound the dragon physically. It forced the concept of mortality into an immortal mind. It made Alduin, for a few terrible seconds, understand what it felt like to know he could end. For a being who had declared himself eternal and built his entire identity around permanence, that was a specific horror. Not the pain, the meaning. When Alduin first heard it, his response was rage and disbelief. Nivarin Jur, cowardly, faithless mortals. What twisted words have you created? The word he reached for was cowardly, because from his perspective, using the awareness of mortality as a weapon was somehow a betrayal of the rules of engagement. He was not wrong that it was a new kind of thing. He was wrong about whether the mortals had earned the right to make it. They had. In every tribute extracted, every generation that lived and died kneeling, every child born into a world they were told was ordained, they had earned Dragonrend the way all the most terrible weapons are earned, through the patient accumulation of unbearable cost. Dragonrend grounded him, but it could not kill him. Not here, not by these three. Feldir the Old had brought an Elder Scroll. He opened it at the summit of the mountain and read it, and the words bent time itself. "Hold Alduin on the wing. Begone, World-Eater. By words with older bones than your own, we break your perch on this age and send you out. You are banished." Alduin's last words before vanishing were, "Val Kel Nikrina." Something like the Elder Scroll. Impossible. And then he was gone. Not dead. Not destroyed. Sent forward through time to an unknown point, a problem deferred rather than solved. Hakon said, afterward, in a voice that knew exactly what the victory had cost. "Yes, the World-Eater is gone. May the spirits have mercy on our souls." The victory was real, and so was its price, and so was the certainty that what had been moved had not been ended. It had only been moved. Here is where the story changes. Everything the listener has heard so far, the dragon cult, the subjugation, the dragon war, the brothers' betrayal, the Elder Scroll banishment, all of it looks different after this. Alduin was not supposed to rule. Not the dragon cult. Not Skyrim. Not a vast empire of dragon priests and stone temples and tribute extracted from generations of kneeling mortals. His actual purpose, confirmed by Paarthurnax in direct dialogue, by Arngeir in the game's epilogue, and by the cosmological structure that the Elder Scrolls world is built on, was to end the current world and allow the next one to begin. The concept the lore uses is the kalpa. The world is not permanent. It is created, it lives, it runs its course, and it is consumed, so that a new world can be born from what remains. This is not uniquely Nordic. The Khajiit's Alkan serves the same function. The Yokudan Satakal swallows reality and recreates it. Every culture that encounters the deep structure of this universe eventually arrives at the same mechanism, ending so that continuation is possible. Alduin was designed to be that mechanism. When the world had run its course, he was supposed to come and consume it, not from cruelty, not from ambition, the way the night consumes the day, so that morning can come. He was not the destroyer of worlds. He was the beginning of what comes next. He chose, instead, to be the apex of what already was. Paarthurnax asks the last Dragonborn in the game something that lands softly, but lands deep. Perhaps this world is simply the egg of the next kalpa. Leinvokian? Would you stop the next world from being born? And Arngeir, the Greybeard leader, is careful and specific about this in the epilogue. He says that those who overthrew Alduin in ancient times only postponed the day of reckoning. Not stopped it, postponed. The Dragon War was not a war against evil. It was a correction. The dragon cult, the subjugation, the 1,000 years of terror. None of that was the function. It was what happens when a mechanism decides it would rather be worshipped than work. Alduin was afraid of the thing he was supposed to do. Afraid of the end, the very end he was designed to facilitate. And that fear dressed itself as pride, and the pride built an empire, and the empire caused a war, and the war left wounds in time that took thousands of years to stop bleeding. The most powerful thing in his age, and he was afraid. The Elder Scrolls reading at the summit of the throat of the world did three things. It removed Alduin from the Merethic era. It cast him forward through time to an unknown point, somewhere in the future that the three heroes could not predict. And it left something behind that the lore calls the time wound, a fracture in the fabric of time itself, permanently located at the exact spot where the reading had happened. Not healing, not fading over the millennia, waiting. The UESP notes it as a possible dragon break, one of those rare moments where the normal flow of cause and effect was ruptured, where multiple versions of events briefly existed simultaneously before collapsing back into the record. The summit of the throat of the world had been scarred by something done with older power than the mountain expected. The Dragon Guard, the ancient order that would eventually become the Blades, understood what this meant. They could not know when Alduin would reappear, but they knew he would. So they built something for the people who would come after. Alduin's wall, at the place called Skyhaven Temple, took 6 years to complete. Craftsmen were drawn from across the empire. Emperor Raymond II returned to it personally in the year 1 E2818 to dedicate it. The wall recorded the prophecy of the Dragonborn, the sequence of events that would preface and surround Alduin's return, because his return was not in question. Only the timing was unknown. The Grand Master of the Dragon Guard, who oversaw the wall's construction, believed it was a gift to the generations that would follow. Knowing what was coming was better than not knowing, even if knowing could not make it easier. Paarthurnax, who had chosen the throat of the world as his home, precisely because it was the place where his brother had been banished, because he was keeping watch, because he had decided he would wait as long as he had to, spent the following 3,000 years doing two things simultaneously: watching the wound in time, and trying to become something worth the watching. He built the Greybeards. He guided generation after generation of Nords in the way of the voice, a philosophy developed by the hero Jürgen Windcaller that held the Thuh should be used only in reverence, never for violence or domination. He spent those 3,000 years constructing, through daily practice, a version of himself that could resist the thing he was born to be. The lust for domination, the lore confirms, is innate to dragonkind. It does not go away. It is managed. It is held back by something you have to rebuild every morning. When the last Dragonborn finally reached him, Paarthurnax said directly what those years had contained. What is better, to be born good, or to overcome your evil nature through great effort? His name is ambition, overlord, cruelty. He chose to ask himself that question every single day for 3,000 years on a cold mountain, because his brother had never thought to ask it at all. And at the bottom of those 3,000 years, there was still a wound in the stone, still waiting for Alduin to fall back through it. The prophecy does not give a date. The Elder Scrolls never work that way. What Alduin's wall showed was a sequence: civil war in Skyrim, brothers in conflict, blood on the mountain, and from the sky, black wings returning. In 4E201, all of it arrived at once. Skyrim was at war with itself. Ulfric Stormcloak, who had killed the previous High King, had sparked a rebellion against imperial rule. A civil conflict with genuine grievances on both sides, ancient enough to have roots in things that had happened centuries before anyone still living was born. In a small border settlement called Helgen, an imperial execution was being prepared. Among the prisoners on the block was a traveler caught crossing the border at the wrong moment. Alduin came from the east, the direction from which dawn comes, and he expressed his arrival in fire. He did not know the Dragonborn was there. He was not a divine instrument engineered to interrupt the execution. He arrived in 4 E201 because the temporal banishment had deposited him somewhere in that time, and Helgen was simply where he landed, and attacking it was simply what he was. The prisoner survived in the chaos, escaped because there was too much happening for anyone to maintain attention on a chopping block. The World Eater, in his first act upon returning to the world, gave his enemy life. By accident. He began resurrecting the dragons buried in their mounds across Skyrim, a power seemingly unique to him among all dragon kind, confirmed by the UESP's lore entry. The ability to call flesh back to ancient bones to undo the deaths of those who had been slain in the Dragon War belonged to Alduin alone. He moved through the province, visiting mound after mound, rebuilding the army he had never been supposed to raise. And then, because the civil war that Alduin's return had made worse was generating a steady supply of fresh casualties, the UESP's lore entry notes this directly. He found his way to Sovngarde. Sovngarde is described in the game with the particular tenderness reserved for something that was built to be beautiful. The valley around Shaw's Hall is rich with wildflowers in red and blue and purple, soft light that does not quite come from a sun, a sense of warmth and openness that belongs to a place designed for rest, for the laying down of the specific weight that comes from living hard and dying honestly. The Hall of Valor itself, where the greatest Nord heroes feasted with Shaw through an eternity of hard-won reward, is a mead hall the size of a cathedral, stone-built and immovable, enduring in the way that things endure when they were made to endure and not simply to last. It was not at rest when the last Dragonborn arrived. From the ancient temple complex of Skoldafen, one of Alduin's high fanes, described in the UESP as a location he guarded, jealously, inaccessible by any mortal path and reachable only by air. He had opened a portal directly into the Nordic afterlife. He stood at the entrance to the Hall of the Honored Dead, and he was feeding. Not in the cosmic sense of the kalpa, not as the mechanism of world renewal, not fulfilling his purpose as the being designed to consume existence so that the next existence could begin. He was eating the dead to get stronger. He wrapped Sovngarde in fog, a mist that confused and disoriented the dead, driving them away from the Hall of Valor and into the open valley where he hunted. Warriors who had died in the Skyrim Civil War stumbled through the gloom, unable to find their way to the hall they had been promised, while a vast dark shape circled above and descended periodically to take another soul from the fog. The civil war that Alduin's own return had worsened. The UESP's lore entry notes this directly, that Ulfric's escape from Helgen prolonged the conflict and secured a steady flow of souls for Alduin to consume, had become a supply line. The war fed the fog, and the fog fed him, and the cycle continued, indifferent to the people being ground between its teeth. There is a Stormcloak soldier the last Dragonborn encounters in Sovngarde, caught in the mist, terrified in a way that death should have rendered impossible. He says that in life he fell foes unnumbered and was fearless in battle, but that no blade can defend against the terror of this gloom-stricken valley. He has survived a war. He has crossed into the afterlife. He is in the place his entire culture promised was the reward for a life of courage and a death well met. The World Eater is circling above. The three ancient heroes who had originally banished Alduin, Gurmlet, Hakon, and Feldir, came out of the Hall of Valor to stand alongside the last Dragonborn. Together, using clear skies to push back the fog that Alduin kept regenerating, they forced the confrontation, each shout buying a few seconds of visibility, each regeneration of mist, a reminder that Alduin could keep doing this forever if they let him. 3 cycles. Then the valley was clear. Alduin, denied his cover and his hunting ground, turned and fought. He could only be damaged by Dragonrend. Immune while in flight, immune to everything except the shout built from mortal suffering, the one he had called cowardly, and twisted when he first heard it at the throat of the world. When the shout grounded him, there was a window, brief and violent and loud, and it was enough. His final words screamed as his form began to dissolve. Zuu unslad, zuu nis oblan. I am eternal, I cannot end, not a threat. Bewilderment. A being who had existed before time was measurable, confronting for the first time, not as a concept, not as what happened to mortals, but as something happening to him, the possibility that he could end. His body dissolved into nothing. No skeleton, no remains, just darkness fading into wisps, the way a shadow vanishes when you turn the light directly on it. And then something happened that the game almost hides from you. His soul did not go to the last Dragonborn. When every other dragon dies in Skyrim, their soul floods into the Dragonborn. A visible rush of power, the mechanic the entire game is built around, the thing that makes the Dragonborn what they are. Alduin's soul rises, straight upward, into the luminous, strange center of the Sovngarde sky, back toward whatever Akatosh is, back toward the deep structure of time from which, in whatever sense the Elder Scrolls allows for these things, he was originally shed. The UESP's discussion page notes this is visible in the game if you have the right camera angle. The soul flares go up, not toward you, into that glowing thing above. And when Arngir is asked about it in the epilogue, he says, carefully, in the tone of an old man who has thought deeply about a difficult thing. He may be permitted to return at the end of time to fulfill his destiny as the World Eater, but that is for the gods to decide. You have done your part. Not dead, not destroyed, removed again, postponed again. The Dragonborn did what the three ancient heroes did in the Merethic era. Not ended the World Eater, but created a window in which the world can continue. Not forever, long enough. There is a line in the Song of the Dragonborn, the ballad that plays over the game's title screen, that most players have heard without listening to its full weight, that names what Alduin is more precisely than he ever named himself. Alduin, bane of kings, ancient shadow unbound, with a hunger to swallow the world. Not a ruler with a hunger, not a conqueror with a hunger. Hunger. Underneath everything, underneath the dragon cult and the stone halls and the throne built from the compliance of generations. Hunger. The specific appetite of something designed to consume, one thing that chose, instead, to consume everything smaller than its purpose. The designers at Bethesda drew deliberately on Norse mythology in building him. Nidhöggr, the dragon who gnaws at the roots of Yggdrasil, who feeds on the dishonored dead in Niflheim, who survives Ragnarok and continues gnawing in whatever comes after, is clearly visible in Alduin's design. The parallel is exact and intentional. A dragon tied to death and decay and the deep structure of the world rather than to any individual conflict. But there is a meaningful difference between them that the Elder Scrolls introduced deliberately. Nidhöggr does exactly what he is. He gnaws the root because gnawing the root is what Nidhöggr does. There is no version of the Norse myth in which he decides to rule Midgard instead. He is a function. Pure. Alduin makes a choice. He looked at his terrible purpose and decided it was not enough, and in that decision became something that purely functional. Darkness never becomes a character you can grieve for, because you cannot grieve something that only does what it was made to do. You can grieve something that knew better and chose wrong anyway. The Elder Scrolls added moral agency to the machinery of the cosmos, and in doing so, turned an apocalyptic force into a tragedy. A being who was called Destroyer, Devour, Master, and who in the end was afraid of all three. A dragon circled the summit of the highest mountain in the world. It is the image this story began with. Sit with it for a moment more, now that you know what it contains. Not hunting, not gathering strength, waiting for something that had been postponed, the same way a word can be held in the mouth before it is spoken, the same way certain decisions wait for us, patient and enormous, in the shape of our lives. The mountain below is where three mortals once stood, with words they were not supposed to be able to say, facing a being that should have been unmovable and changed history. Not by being stronger than what they faced, by knowing exactly what it was afraid of, by speaking that thing directly into its face. The dragon circled. The mountain is empty now, and somewhere beyond any sky we can point at, a soul that rose above Sovngarde waits in a place where waiting is not quite the same thing as existing. Not gone, deferred. What the story asks in the end is something small enough to fit in one sentence. The most powerful thing in that age looked at what it was supposed to do and chose to stay instead. Not for more power, not for destruction. It wanted to be seen, to be held in place by the attention of other beings, as though that attention were a kind of permanence. Maybe you know a smaller version of that feeling. The thing you are supposed to do, and you stay anyway, because moving means letting something go. The world kept going, bent and scarred and full of old wounds, but going. The questions persist. Theologians still argue whether Alduin and Akatosh are the same being, whether the kalpa is a prophecy or a mercy, whether a soul rising into a silver sky above Sovngarde is a defeat or a return to something much older than defeat. The stones still stand. The word walls still hold their language in frost. If this story gave you something to carry, if the World Eater and the purpose he abandoned, and the brother who waited 3,000 years on a cold mountain left something behind that lingers, please consider subscribing to Sleepable Gaming Lore. And if you came looking for something that would hold your attention just long enough to let the rest of the world get quiet, I hope it did. Leave a like if you would like more. It means a great deal. Now let the fire fade a little. Let the wind move through the high, cold stone. Ancient, patient, the sound of wings somewhere above the world, and then nothing, and then sleep.